Hello, everyone, and welcome to another webinar from the IIBA Ireland chapter. We hadn't had one in a couple of months, so it's good to be back. So as usual, let me walk you through the agenda for today. So I will be quickly introducing the speaker because I know you didn't come here today to hear me talk. So I will quickly introduce the speaker. Next, we will have the presentation itself, and at the end, as usual, we will have a quick Q&A, a couple of minutes for Q&A. Just a little bit of governance. So in terms of interaction, you will be able to write comments and express yourself through the chat. And also there's a Q&A section for you to raise your questions, and they will eventually be addressed by your speaker. In case either the chat is not open to everyone or the Q&A is not open to everyone, sometimes that happens. I will once our speaker starts the session itself, the presentation itself, I will have a look at the settings. So don't worry. Sometimes these things happen. Okay, so folks, allow me to introduce our speaker today. Today we're very happy to welcome Deidre Caren. She is the founder and director of Agora Insights. For what it's worth, where is Agora Insights? So it's a company in New Zealand, and so Deidre is going to speak to us from New Zealand. Deidre comes from the future, so she has. If you're in Ireland, you know that Deidre comes from the future, so she has the answers because it's the 29th there already. Here in
I'll
Ireland,
give you the lotto tickets.
okay. Here we're stuck. We're still stuck in the past. We're still on the 28th of November. So Deidre has more than 25 years of experience in terms of business delivery. She has knowledge in key areas such as business architectural design and strategic analysis, learning methodologies, and integrated systems. And she's a mentor, and she has tailored training programs for professionals. And she and through her company, she also offers consulting solutions. So Deidre, thank you so much for joining, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Great. All right, let me share my screen. So today it's quite interesting because over the last probably, I don't know, 10 sessions, it's been quite busy lately. We've spoken mostly about AI, and so it's quite refreshing to talk about design thinking. And I will bring in a little bit around what that might mean for you, in terms of how you would use design thinking. But today, really, with design thinking, the idea is that we should understand how we solve problems better. And I'm going to use a case study to help you with that, solving problems better situation. And hopefully help you understand design thinking a little bit better. So if you can put a thumbs up, if you have done design thinking before, that would be really helpful. Then I can at least get an idea if you can. But if you cannot, it's okay. I'm not quite sure what the settings are. All right, so let's get started. And yes, thanks for the introduction. When you have a good hair day and you go and do that all day. All right, so I'm going to talk about Supreme Coffee, and this is a fictional case. And I'm going to use this to help you understand design thinking. Because design thinking it's not It's nothing more than a way in which we can solve problems and think strategically. It has a bias towards action, and so we'll talk about what that means. And it really is how we approach things. So I'm going to try explain it simply, but mostly if you are ever involved in design thinking, you should be going somewhere with someone to really immerse yourself. Immersion is such a key component of design thinking. So let's talk a little bit about our case study, and then we'll talk about how we could apply design thinking using that. So Supreme Coffee is a made-up company that is based in New Zealand, and the vision is to revolutionize the global coffee shop experience and become the most admired franchise with exceptional coffee, innovative plant-based offerings, and commitment to sustainability and customer centricity. So this is a made-up company. I'm not claiming that this company actually exists, but that's the idea. And the mission of Supreme Coffee is to create a transformative coffee shop experience that delights customers with the highest quality coffee and innovative plant-based, as I mentioned, exceptional service while building a sustainable future. So very ambitious goals from Supreme Coffee, but it is what it is. All right. So what is design thinking? Now, I want you to imagine Supreme Coffee has been a very successful brand in New Zealand, and people really enjoy going and having a great coffee experience. But obviously the brand's thinking, well, we could go become more global and we could franchise around the world, and we could take our brand and be a little bit different from, let's say, your Starbucks or the other big coffee brands. So Supreme Coffee, although a really good operating company, is thinking of ways in which to reach a market that's a little bit bigger and broader than what it currently is. And so it definitely has some problems it needs to solve along the way. So design thinking it's a human-centered approach, right? And this means that we have to think about who is going to be in this coffee shop, right? If we go to London, if we go to Ireland, if we go to, I don't know, the US, wherever we might be, how is Supreme Coffee going to really think about who is going to come into their shops, why they're coming into their shops, what are the thought processes around that? And so design thinking is all around thinking of ways in which we can solve problems and really truly understand who our clients are, who our customers are, who our stakeholders are, etc. And as business analysts, we have to think about stakeholders all the time. It's not as if stakeholders, you can just ignore them, but we really do need to think about them all the time. So design thinking follows 5 key steps. Now, I always get very nervous when people see processes because sometimes people lose the point of what you're trying to do when they see steps. They go, oh, we already did that, and now we're going to move on to the next step. And don't really understand the value of understanding that we can break things into stages, but we also have to be flexible. But simply, design thinking starts off with empathize. And empathize is to say, okay, in Supreme Coffee, if we go to London or we go to if we go to Ireland, and you guys have different culture and different approach, what would that experience mean to those particular customer base. So if Supreme Coffee says, okay, our first franchise shop is going to be in Ireland, then it would make a lot of sense for the team to go to Ireland and go meet Irish people and go see what the culture is and see if things actually work. And so when we talk about empathize, we're not talking about, hey, I did this analysis and this document on what we're doing. But, it can be quite challenging for people to understand how things are in different contexts. So when we talk about the first stage of design thinking, everything is about immersing yourself into somebody else's point of view. And we often don't do this in business. I remember I was chatting to a few BAs and we had to go and investigate something, and they went and looked up all the documents and we're talking to people inside the organization. And I said, why don't we just go to the customer and go look at what they're doing in the factory? And many people don't realize, as business analysts, you can do that. You don't have to be in your office or only you can actually go and watch and observe and see what things are happening, because you learn a lot more from observing than you would from just asking people to go to a workshop, in your office and write down their requirements. So there's a lot more to design thinking. That is that bias towards action, go to the person, go find out what they want. So in the Supreme Coffee, as I mentioned, example, it would be go to Ireland, go sit at different coffee shops, go look at what the coffee shop that's the most popular in your city might be, and why is it so popular? Understand what the cultural norms are. That's what we call empathize. Next, we look at defining. So we want to actually frame things. We want to understand what it is that would be the most suitable. And this is where we present a problem. We ask ourselves a question, how might we do something? Then we look at ideation, so come up with great ideas. And we go wide. We want to think as broadly as we possibly can. We want to think of crazy ideas that nobody's ever thought of before. And this is kind of how we want to do it. Then prototype. It's so important to have a prototype, and whether that is just a coffee shop layout that is done on a piece of paper, or if it's a actual store, pop-up store, or something along those lines. That's what we mean with prototype. And there's a bias towards action, as I mentioned earlier. So when you have a bias towards action, you are focusing on what value you can give by doing. It's not about by theorizing. It's not about doing requirements. It's going there and saying, this is exactly what I can do right now. And then we look at testing to see if our theories, our doing, our understanding is actually working. So, and I'll give you some further examples. So we look at what we call convergent and divergent thinking. So basically, we want to think of crazy ideas, like things that no one's ever thought of, in coffee shops. What if you can get it from a tap? What if you can, you start going into these really, really broad ideas, because you don't want to constrain ideas in the very beginning, and broad ways to solve problems. And then we go into convergence thinking, where we think, okay, well, feasibly or practically, what would be a better idea? But the idea with being creative and thinking of crazy ideas without being judged is that you never know what might come out. You never know what options might come out of this type of thinking. So you have to be very open to how things are working, how they align with where you're going, and also just, it's almost like going into a playground, right? Think of kids in kindergarten. I don't know if you use that term. I've only found it recently. It's not that common. But kids in kindy, they're playing. They try different games. They try different ways to do that, do different things. And this is what we'd call divergent thinking. And then when they are set in a game, they will come together and they will create these rules. And I don't know if you've ever seen kids do that in in kindy. It's really funny how they come together and they discuss the rules that this crazy game that they've invented, and then they go and play. And this is essentially what you're doing in design thinking. You're coming up with a new way to do something and to play. As I mentioned, design thinking is a lot about solving problems, and we often have a problem solving technique where we say, how might we? And so how might we, sorry, I just see a Q&A in here. Okay. Yes, I'm just trying to remember the name. I can recommend a book. If I don't remember it yet, I will come back to you a little bit later or send an email. So the how might we is really around ways in which we can solve problems. And there's nothing better than solving problems. In fact, in 2 days' time in the Ottawa, no, not Ottawa chapter, Ohio, one of the chapters, I'm actually talking about problem solving and AI. So for those who want to have the next iteration, that might be a good segue into the next one. So the how might we's are how might we solve particular problems for particular situations. And really what we want to do here is, as I mentioned, frame the question. How are we going to do certain things for Coffee Supreme? And again, when we have design thinking, we're not trying to solve the problems immediately. We're trying to solve the problems with an understanding of what it might mean. So, as I mentioned, so we've got our 5 steps. Let's look at the first one, empathize. Now, when we looked at Supreme Coffee, so Supreme Coffee, as I mentioned, has got this vision to really franchise around the world. And Supreme Coffee is really looking to understand how they might do that and what are the options. But the first thing is ready to understand the customers, the stakeholders, whoever it might be, and understand if this is seriously what they want. And as I mentioned earlier, this is where you would go to the venue. You would say, okay, we're franchising around the world. We're not just going to copy and paste. We're actually going to go to the venue and we're going to see what we might be doing in Ireland, for instance, versus New Zealand. And how much of the New Zealand culture do we want to carry over into Ireland, and how blended do we want to be in terms of not the coffee beans, but in terms of our approach, and how might we change how we think about certain things. So through customer feedback and market research, so looking at the Supreme Coffee, we learned that while while customers love our sustainability sourced high quality coffee, they also interested in learning more about what the ingredients are. So when you start asking questions and you start chatting to different people, then you get a better insight. And so I know as BAs, we do this a lot when we look at requirements. And I think the real difference between I suppose between design thinking and doing the normal requirements gathering process is that design thinking doesn't start off with necessarily this is where we're going, like the solution. It starts off with trying to understand the person first and looking at what problems we might be solving. Okay, here's a question. How to practice design thinking being a novice or a beginning? Okay. Knowingly and unknowingly, we still apply in design thinking through the BA process. Absolutely. Apologize. I believe there's 2 questions asked at once. That's okay. All right. Like I said, design thinking isn't actually that fancy. There's a process, and that is a recommended process. But really, it's about the mindset that you have. So if you are starting a new project, instead of going, okay, we're going to be gathering requirements and we're going to be doing these different things, we should rather say, hey, let's go on site. Let's go and see what is happening before we even start, the requirements gathering process or the project. Let's just go on a road trip and see what that business is doing, why they're doing it this way, truly trying to understand. And that is the first part of design thinking. And it will absolutely change the way that you look at things. I'm going to give you a different example now to Supreme Coffee. In New Zealand, we have an aging population, and that means it puts a lot of issues on healthcare. And I'm not talking about COVID or anything. I'm just talking about, healthcare in general. And one of the discussions that we had was to say, how might we actually bring healthcare to the home? So in the future, what does healthcare look like where somebody doesn't have to be emergency driven to hospital, but they can get immediate care for basic services right there and then? And we know we have things, and this started after the Christchurch earthquakes, where they had to rethink a whole lot of things. And we're talking about 12 years ago. So it's a long time. They were building a new hospital and they approached design thinking, and it was all around how might we do things differently and how might we think about the future differently. And it's so relevant today, considering we now have all kinds of technology, we have AI tools, we have all these things. And so the idea there was to ask the right questions and immerse into the customer experience or the patient experience, which was used at the time. And that was really my live experience. I obviously went and visited Stanford and did a few of those other things, but that live experience really changed me to say, okay, so what does healthcare look like in the future? And how might we change things in order that when we old, we have all the resources we need, and that emergency services are really there for surgeries and things that cannot be done at home. So there was some of those questions. Your second question was through the BA process. I'll get to that at the end. And then Patrick, a very familiar name. Could you provide any suggested help to change mindsets? Yeah, mindsets are really difficult because people are so used to being at their desk and doing things a certain way. And it really is a difficult process to do. As I said, and this is in my personal experience, take them out of the office and take them to the venue, and whatever that might mean. And I know a lot of us do digital transformation. We'll go and work in particular areas and particular spaces within our business, but then go and visit a competitor or a company that does similar things. And this is another thing that people don't think about. And I don't understand why. Um, we also went to go look at other companies and work with other teams to say, what are you guys doing? How can we collaborate with you? You seem to be really good at, doing digital transformation. And most companies are pretty much open to it because it doesn't cost them anything, but they're doing some knowledge sharing between the groups. And so the first thing is try get people out of the way, get them away, like away from their own problems. They need to move out of that space completely. So empathizing is really, if you can get people to start this process, the rest of it kind of falls into place. And it's a really easy way in which for people to truly understand. And this is why I use the term investigative journalist for a business analyst. If you're a really good business analyst, you understand what an investigative journalist does, is really go into the heart of the situation, not someone that's going to sit there and read a book and then write an article and have an opinion. An investigative journalist is really trying to understand the root cause and what's the problem behind the problem. The other thing with empathizing stage is that we have to have diversity. Getting a whole bunch of BAs together to talk to one stakeholder group is not going to give you answers. Like, for instance, let's just go back to the hospital example. You need developers in that conversation. You need doctors in the conversation. You need nurses. You need administrators. You need BAs who are going to really look at problems in different ways. So it's really about diversity and understanding, okay, we're going to bring this team together and we're going to look at different ways in which to solve this problem. Because obviously from a technology point of view, you want someone who's really good at technology, but you also want a doctor to go, there's no ways I'll ever use that. Or the administrator to say, actually, the paperwork is too hard and we can't get permissions and things like that. So how can we expedite the whole process for different people? So the empathize bit is around really understanding people and understanding ways in which to work with different people. Next, we look at defining. And so this is around framing the right problem. And as I mentioned, 2 days' time, we'll be talking about this in a little bit more detail. However, what I do want to say is, in my experience, many BAs are bad at understanding problems. And for me, that's a real issue. It's a real problem. If you don't fully understand the problem, it's really hard to come up with a solution. And often you'll hear things like, our CRM system isn't performing as it would, we need to have a new solution. And then people go, oh, we know the problem. The problem is it's not performing. No, that is not the problem. There's that famous case where I think it was in London, I could be wrong, where the problem, was that they had, well, basically the pigeons were pooping all over one of the landmark sites. And people were saying, oh, how do we get rid of the pigeons? And how do we do these different kind of things? And, how do we clean up every morning, how do we clean up the poop? And it turns out the problem was actually that because the lights were on, that became a beacon and they started pooping there. I'm not doing justice to the story, but the point being is that often people don't do what I would call a root cause analysis to really understand the problem and why they're experiencing those particular problems. So if you look at design thinking, you look at, let's say, Supreme Coffee, we might want to have a problem statement that says, how might we make Supreme Coffee sustainable sourcing process more transparent and educate customers? Those are just one of the problems we could look at. But that's a difficult thing to do. If we're going to franchise in Ireland, for instance, our question might be, how might the Irish people relate to us in a way where we become partners? Those are the type of things. Here's another question. In your opinion, is there any merit in having a separate designer rather than a BA? I think so. I think that for a lot of the BA role, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades, right? And there's advantages and there's disadvantages to that. And if you're not particularly good in a particular area, then it would make sense to have a design thinker. And remember, what design thinking isn't about designs. It's about thinking of how do we solve problems through designing almost in our mind and physically. But I think BAs often get, kind of thrown in to do everything for everyone and rather focus on what you're really good at And so you might be a really good problem solver, or you might be really good at understanding systems. You might be really good at stakeholder engagement. It doesn't really matter. But what you bring to the table in design thinking is a set of people that have very specific skills, and they have very specific perspectives. And if a designer is required, you should bring someone in to have that conversation. So framing this is a difficult bit, because this is going to lead to where we're going. So the first thing is we go there and we go, oh, wow, this is quite challenging. We've got different people we're working with, and how we're working with them. But then we want to set a problem that we want to solve. And people love problems. I often say it's really difficult, because when you see a problem, you just automatically want to start solving it. And it's just human nature. But that's a good thing. I really do think that's a good thing. Because if you can present the company with problems, they will often give you a project to go with. And so as a design thinker, you should go somewhere and come back and present a problem. And you never know where you'll get. So I think that goes back to your question earlier. Oh, there seems to be a delete. I think that was your question, Patrick.
Sorry, Deidre, I took the liberty to move them to the answer tab.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. Oh, there you go.
No.
And we'll come back to that. Yes, correct. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let's just look at the IDA stage. So this is where you come up with heaps of ideas. And this is where you go, okay, we could do this, we could do this. So in the Supreme Coffee case, we could have an app, we could help them on their journey, we could show them a tracking farm to cup type of thing, so people could understand how that might work. We might have to do different training and productions. I mean, we can go really, really wide in terms of how we think in. And that's where when we ideate, we're coming up with multiple ways in which we can do something. It's not what's the right answer. And this is where people have been so constrained for many years. Like, it doesn't matter. It's all made up, right? This is what I often say to people. Go back to that kindy example, right? The kids play, they come up with a game, they create some rules, and then they run around, and it looks as crazy as it always has, and it's all made up. But this is how they do it. So we as adults often get constrained to thinking in a particular way when we don't need to. So you just go completely, kind of far, and then you go, these are the ideas that I think are the most realistic for what we want to do. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't have broad or diverse, but the most realistic. Now, prototyping. I remember many years ago, what people didn't realize is that a requirement can also be a design. And for those who've studied BABAC will know that in chapter 7 of your BABAC guide, the first half is about requirements and the second half is about design. And a requirement and a design are the same thing. And this is quite important, because in design thinking, we don't focus on listing requirements. Our requirements are derived through our prototype. So we actually design first and then refine afterwards. And that's part of the testing process. So there's some significant differences in how we do things as a traditional business analyst, even if you're agile, versus design thinking that says, do the prototype first. Let's test if people like it. Let's test if this works. And so you actually don't have requirements, dare I say it. And so in the example, for instance, with the hospital, what they did was they created a mock hospital. So they had a big field and they took cardboard and they said, okay, well, this is where the house will be, and this is where the bedroom would be, and this way these cardboard things would be. And people were designing the mock hospital, even before, going into requirements or anything like that, was actually testing, oh, does that look right? And for those who've gone and renovated their house or bought new furniture, you know how you shift the furniture around. Oh, should I put this here or should I put this? It's kind of like that. And so requirements stop becoming the first step. Design becomes the first step, and requirements are the refinement of the design that come afterwards. They're almost like a specification rather than a requirement. So here's another. Design thinking is non-linear iterative process. Yes. Whereas BAs usually follow sequential processes, yes, for requirements gathering. So I do want to say that business analysts are meant to be iterative, right? So you might find requirements as a part of discovery. And so you might be doing this intuitively anyway. However, design thinking focuses on a design prototype. You want to get that done as soon as possible. So think in your organization, when somebody says, and I did struggle with a project manager on one of these projects. We were offering something. One of the big corporations was offering kind of points around Christmas time where you could get certain things. And so what we did was we started up with a mock-up of what the website would look like and what the form would look like. We didn't have formalized requirements or user stories. And we just worked on mock-up after mock-up, and the project manager couldn't cope with it at all because he was waiting for the requirements. And we delivered the project in about 6 weeks, all up. And the PM was still complaining about where's the requirements document. I can tell you, yeah, it didn't go down well, and he didn't understand what was going on. And he felt that the requirements were the biggest problem in the project. And so that was certainly not a really good experience for me personally, because at the time, as working as a BA, he kind of really did influence the project team going, oh, but there's no requirements. Anyway, the project was a huge success. It worked really well. And we used the design thinking approach, which is to say, let's build the prototype, let's test it out, and let's see if this is correct. And then let's do any other specifications around the details. And that is a whole different way from how business analysts work. And you have to be careful in that space. You have to have a good manager that really understands what you're trying to do here and what you're testing. And even if you do it in a very small way. But like I said, there's no reason why any business analyst cannot go on site and get some good insights at the very beginning and not have to try follow the normal. We sit in a workshop with our project team and, come up with ideas. So that's a very, very important part is prototyping. So design first, requirement second. Because you can shift things around and you can change things and you can do things much quicker. All right. And then we look at the testing phase. So now this is really to understand, does the solution actually meet what we were thinking? So if we're looking at, our initial problem statement, which was how might we make sustainable, the Supreme Coffee sustainability, how might we educate our customers? Well, we spoke about multiple ideas, like we could have an app that shows how the beans track all the way through. And at some point, we'd have to test if those ideas actually are viable and they're worth doing. And, often businesses talk about minimum viable product. And what we do in design thinking is we talk about how a product should be specific to the need that we have right now. And it doesn't have to be the cheapest. It doesn't have to be the quickest. It has to be at least what's going to solve the majority of the problem. It's almost like the 80-20% rule. So you want to try to solve all of the problem, but you want to get the best, simplest solution from that. And so, for instance, We could then test these prototypes, get feedback from customers on the web design and educational materials, conduct a pilot coffee tasting event. The feedback would then be used to refine our prototypes, make sure that they effectively educate our customers about sustainability and their impact. So as you can see, the way that we test in as well is we're in the field, we're doing it. We're investigative journalists. We're going, oh yeah, okay, this is what happened. Oh yes, you do like how this works. So it's quite a different way of thinking. So when we talk about design thinking from a BA context, it's design first, requirements second. And that's going to be a complete shift for most business analysts. It's not scary though. It's not scary. It's actually really fun to do. And then let's just look at the difference between traditional problem solving and design thinking. So design thinking is a flexible and innovative way. So we go, we meet different people, we have conversations, we try things out, we play, we draw pictures. We want to understand how things are working. It focuses on the human-centered needs. So who are our stakeholders, who are our customers, who are our patients? Who are the doctors that we're going to be working with? These are the kind of questions where we lean. And I know with business analysts, when we look at chapter 4 of our book, we really do look to refine some of that. We're using Jira tool for requirements gathering. Yes. So as you can see, there can be quite a lot of complexity if you're using things like Jira, for instance, and you're focusing on the requirement. It's really hard to get the true understanding of how the design and the background to all the problems might be solved. It does start with observation, as I said. We don't start with this is the project we're working on and everybody, start gathering requirements. We start with going, let's observe what's happening so that we truly understand and can empathize with the situation. It helps to discover the right questions to solve, and it empathizes iterative and testing. So it really does work to say we are doing things a little bit differently. We're going to come up with a design. So think about it this way. If you're an architect, right? You don't start when the client says, hey, I want to renovate my house and blah, blah, blah. And then the architect runs off and gives you a requirement specification of how your house is going to be. No, the architect first gives you some designs and says, oh, you could do this and you could do that and you could do this. And you go, oh, I like option 2, but can you incorporate option 3? Maybe the kitchen design in option 3 works much better for me. This is design thinking. And once you've confirmed that this is the prototype that you really like and you're working with, you then do the requirements of how to actually build it. And that comes second in the process. So traditional problem solving, it's methodical, scientific. None of this is a problem, by the way. Everything's about context in life. It ignores the details that don't seem directly related to the goals. And often if you look at designing a house, although we talk about this is the type of house we want, often what happens is people will realize things that they didn't even think of in the conversation of looking at the designs that they have available and how that might work for them. As well, the traditional problem solving starts with a perceived problem, not a experienced problem, and not something that is quite broad, and has the risk of trying to solve the wrong problem. This happens a lot in projects, and people think that projects are failing because of their bad requirements or their bad, project management or their bad leadership or whatever it might be. But often it's because you're just not solving the right problem. and it doesn't plan for iterations or testing. So design thinking, which is quite different from what we do in other areas, really does plan for that iterative approach. Can you recommend a tool for tracking and documenting design thinking actions, tasks, and results? So we use a term in design thinking where, you know, it's kind of like, because it's like a playground, we don't really have things like structured tools, but you would do things like mirror, and you would look at doing prototypes on different boards. You'd look at doing wireframes. If you were physically in a venue, you'd take photos. This is actually, that reminds me, business analysts often sit there and take notes and run workshops. You should just video everything, right? And then you run it through AI and you go, explain this. And you basically get a lot of insights from what has occurred. So to answer your question, and I had to think about it for a minute, number one, use some AI, right? Because you exploring, you're experimenting, you're recording, and it doesn't have to be chat GTP. It can be things like you can look at the transcripts, you can interview people, you can just record their actions, you can look at how they do things. And where you store that in your database is going to be a different discussion altogether. But certainly you do have teams, you have various options. And so you have to think of it as a sandbox, a messy place where people are trying things out and there's information required. At the end of the project, once you've started to do that, you do have to refine and collate and kind of decide what information you're going to keep and what information you're going to lose. When it looks at traceability for requirements, a very important concept, requirements, once we've done our design and once our design prototype has been approved, we do need to have requirements or specifications, because that is really important. But that's the point at which we do them. And then we should be able to trace that, and we should be storing it in a tool like Jira or whichever tool you decide to use. It could even be a spreadsheet. Like, I'm just being very simple here. But if I go back to the experience with, you know, redoing the hospital or the health experience, let's say, of the elderly, which will be us in a few years, the real thing there was to only do the requirements once we really understood the problem that we're trying to solve. And the mock-ups and the prototypes and the, you know, dirty trying things out and having a play on the playground was really where we had to go through first until we got to see the picture and got to see how things work. I hope that answers your question. So just from Babok point of view, just to these two work, they can work really well. And as I said, the biggest thing in your mindset is to change your view of a design and a requirement and swap them. And that's going to be for BAs, and this is just because of your role. For other people, I would give different advice because they have different roles. But start with going, there's a term that they use in lean manufacturing, which is going to the gemba. And that means, and I might not be pronouncing it completely correctly, but it means that you go and you observe and you watch and you learn by being there. And this is what design thinking promotes, is going to the gemba, really trying to understand what people are doing, why they're doing it this way, what are the problems that they're experiencing, and why do we do things in a particular way, and then look at the requirements for the change. And so the biggest change for business analysts is just to swap their process around. And so start with the design in the beginning, and work your way to the requirements at the end. And that will be really good. But like I said, something you can do that's really simple, take away, and not have to bring in design thinking into your organization today is merely to start observing people differently, learning from them, using some tools to understand problems differently, because that is where you can really look to solve problems. The difference between BABOK, by the way, is it's a framework of everything we do as business analysts and how all of that is covered, whereas design thinking is just a problem-solving tool. So you got to think of the techniques in chapter 10. Design thinking would be one of the techniques that would be employed. Obviously, it does change the chapter 7 of your BABOK, as I mentioned, but BABOK covers many, many, many things. So you shouldn't think that you're going to either be a design thinker or you're going to be, follow the standards in BABOK. You should be incorporating all of it into your toolbox, including design thinking. So we go back to the Supreme Coffee. Remember that what we're trying to do with Supreme Coffee is offer some kind of unique proposition, unparalleled coffee combined with diverse plant menu, unwavering commitment to sustainability. So these are the things we need to understand in our business: the who, the what, the why, the when, etc. And we need to understand who are we doing things for. So when we look at design thinking, we're prototyping for discerning coffee lovers, for health conscious individuals, for environmentally aware customers, for professionals, students, creatives looking for a vibrant space. So truly understanding that, we'd have to go and meet people and talk to people, the really hardest bit of what we do as business analysts. And we'd have to engage, and we'd have to observe, and we'd have to really be the investigative journalists that we could be. And the article that we write at the end, be that requirements, is a compelling one, is a good one, is a concise, but can really help people move forward. So that's me on design thinking. I hope that helped. Are there any questions? So the BA process, just to answer that last question, knowingly or unknowingly, we still apply design thinking. Yes, as you can see, it's just swap the process. Okay, so that's going to solve the last problem.
Thank you, Deidre. It was a very interesting topic, and as you mentioned, yes, this is not this session is not about AI. Surprise, surprise. I think it's good to now that AI is, of course, obviously very hype and very trendy. I think it's good once in a while to go back to basics and question ourselves how are we trying to solve the client's problems, and also instead of looking at outside tools to help us work, maybe look at ourselves first and how we can improve ourselves. I think that was one of the reasons why we asked you to present exactly this
I
topic.
think that is such an important point.
Yeah.
And in 2024, business analysts have to understand how they're going to be knowledge workers, not just documenters, because AI can document requirements till, forever. It can just run and run and run. We need to be thinking differently, thinking creatively. And you're absolutely right. This is why things like design thinking is a way in which we become knowledge workers. We truly understand the environment. AI is not going to understand the environment like we do. AI can provide information really quickly, and that's super helpful. It can write it well, it can express it well, and it's growing rapidly. So it's really good at things. But although it says it can see, touch, and all of that, there's something different with being able to, as I mentioned in the beginning, if I come from New Zealand and I want to open a coffee shop in Ireland, we know there's going to be a difference. And this is, although I've used, different in country, but it'll be the same in business. It'll be the same where you are today. If you're dealing with the elderly versus the young, it's going to be different. And this is why we have to understand how we're going to gather the information and just use AI to help us get there faster. That's my goal with AI.
Absolutely. And I know this is not an AI session, but it's a topic that I'm interested in for all different reasons, professional and personal. Um, my personal opinion is that the edge that we, the BAs, we the humans, um, and I'm not trying to make this humans versus Skynet, but we humans, the big advantage is that there's a lot of pros on AI, mainly when there are enough data points. And a lot of times our work is to go into the unknown because the customer, the client is trying to break a barrier and go above and beyond and offer something new. And there's not enough information out there to uh, predetermine an outcome, so to speak.
Yes. You are 100% on point there again. So, for instance, AI knows a lot about history, and it's based on history, and it makes assumptions based on history, but it itself doesn't know the future. And so, if you're trying to strategize and you're trying to do things differently, like for instance, let's just talk about the healthcare, bringing healthcare to the home so that people feel safe in their own homes and we can manage aged care and the lack of doctors and blah, blah, blah. Um, that isn't something that's happened traditionally before. Obviously, people have brought, parents up and they live in the home, but these are different problems to be solved and they're future problems. And AI does not have a solution for that. And we don't even know what the ancients did. So, there's it's working off the internet over the last 30 years and capturing data. And that's what it understands and that's how it reasons. And so we absolutely, with design thinking, particularly design thinking focuses on what might be rather than what has been.
Yeah.
And those are very different types of thinking. And AI is not creative. I've tried to ask it some really creative questions, and I'm like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Moreover, we'll delve into, and I'm like, oh, it sounds like a sales pitch. You still cannot quite get to that point where you really having a conversation about the future that hasn't been defined yet. It's still not quite there. Who knows? Maybe next year it will be
Maybe
there.
maybe we need to have another. Maybe you need to come again next year for another session, Deidre, on maybe on AI.
What
Um,
might be? Yeah.
yeah. Okay. I don't see any other questions. I think that's it. I think that's a wrap. Deidre, thank you so much once again for coming, and it was a pleasure. And thank you to all of you that attended our event today. And please look out for our next event. Thank you, and have a great day or evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.